Okay, we are at Finca Soledad, and I want to do this video because as our trip is kind of wrapping up, and right now we have this beautiful, fully washed Sidra, which is amazing. And I thought it would be a good video for us to talk a little bit about what we have learned so far, coming to Origin and spending time with Pepe and what can coffee enthusiasts learn from these types of experiences. Because I think the thing that we are observing is there's a lot of work that happens at Origin that doesn't flow downstream, and a lot of things that happen at a consumer level and even a roaster level that does not flow upstream. So there's kind of, in my opinion, a communication or a break somewhere. And we've seen this. I've seen this break during this trip, and I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about things we have observed, things we have learned, because right now a lot of coffee processing is happening right now, and we're kind of just chilling. And well, we are doing some work, but we're chilling.
The biggest thing is like scale, right? Like, what does the number of cherries from a tree translate into that depulping, down into the drying and fermentation stuff, down to here? And these beans are huge, but these are gonna get even smaller and smaller. The greens are like, I don't know, less than half this size usually. And then we roast it and lose like 20% off of that. So what we get in our final cup is so little compared to what we see out there.
Yeah, and they're out there picking these cherries, and they're meticulously picking them, processing them, and you have to think about where are the losses from the tree, right? And even from planting, right? So like all the way there to fully harvested coffee, there's a lot of loss, and all of the work here, at least at Finca Soledad, is done manually by hand. They pick all those cherries manually, and it's like, how does that translate to what we see here? And then finally, that cup that you brew, right? There's massive loss, in my opinion, looking at what happens here. But also, it's like this producer, Pepe, he is spending meticulous amounts of effort sorting things, right? So there's going to be additional loss there. But in general, it's like, wow, I did not realize this, right? You hear about this. You hear online. You hear industry people talk about, okay, yeah, look at all this work that these producers do. Look at all these work that these pickers do. But you do not realize the scale of cherry and from tree all the way to your cup until you see it with your own eyes. I think that's like one of my biggest learnings so far.
It's like a huge sense of humility also, that like when we buy new grinders, we're like, oh, I'll just season 5 or 10 kilograms through it. But that's like an entire farm's day of work and like 10, 20 people's entire labor out here in the sun. Just gone because you wanted to get like
2% more on your grinder. Yeah. I mean, we're at a farm, like I would argue an artisan farm that has lower yields, and it's just like you kind of, but you even see it here where it's like scale is just, it's so unappreciated. Another thing that I have thought was quite interesting is also breaks in communication between consumers, roasters, and producers. Because right here, we spend a lot of time with Jose Hijan. Jose asked me, he said, hey, do you have any feedback on the coffee, right? What do you think about the coffee? What do you think about the coffee, right? And I was like, I can tell you, but I can only tell you from the perspective of roasted coffee that I, as a consumer, purchase. So that is where a lot of things can get lost. And when I think about it a little bit more, when was the last time when you thought about giving feedback on a coffee, you thought about talking to a producer, right? Most of the time, if I have a problem with a coffee or a batch or a bag that I buy, I complain to the roaster. I never think about, hey, the producer may want to have some feedback. And this was kind of a conversation that got me thinking is when Jose's like, yeah, what do you think about our Sidras? What do you think about our Typica? It's like, yeah, I can tell you about Manhattans, a Poland's Gold, but how useful is that feedback to you, right? I'm not entirely sure, and that's something that I didn't ever thought about. It's like, yeah, these producers do actually want feedback on what their coffees taste like, and there are a lot of things there. One, it's like communication, languages, but also it's just something that I just think as a consumer, we never think about it, right? We always see conversations online. It says, oh, this roaster took this amazing coffee from this producer and like scorched it or botched it, right? But we never think about, the producer might want to actually get some feedback in some sort of way, either maybe on the roast of the coffee, roast of their coffee, or just how their coffees are tasting in general. And I think that's something that I've really started to think about after spending time with Jose and Pepe here.
As a home roaster, it's extra exciting, right? Because this is before you buy those greens and see all the upstream processing. As a roaster also, like we saw them roasting at origin, brewing at origin, but that's like, hopefully they have the knowledge of how to brew so that they understand what we consumers are doing at the end of the cup, right? But that's not a guarantee.
Right.
Not everybody has access, knowledge, or familiarity with techniques or their water grinder, all that. So this is the best case example, but it's not, we can't take it for granted.
Yeah, right. I mean, they have equipment here. We're showing them how to brew, but a lot of the stuff, like they cup coffee, they roast coffee here, but it's like a lot of the understanding of what happens in the home space, which is really where their product ends up in, right? This is going to get roasted and then sold to you. A lot of what is happening there really isn't much visibility for producers. At least here, they have equipment here. They got the same stuff that we got, but it's like a lot of what is happening in the home space of how we are brewing coffee doesn't really seem to have made it over here yet, right? Maybe it wasn't meant to be, but it's like that's something that I've observed. And when we're brewing coffee with someone like Jose, he's looking at, hey, what are the techniques you're using? What's going on, right? You even have Pepe asking us about what type of equipment is good, right? All those types of things. And I think it's like, maybe, we're just it's just like, wow, I'm taking so much of this coffee stuff like for granted, right? I'll buy the bag of coffee from the roaster, I'll brew it, and I'll just be like, okay, it tasted good or it didn't taste good. And if I have feedback, I'll tell the roaster. But I never think about ever providing any information like brew recipe, equipment I use, water, so on and so forth to the producer. And it seems like, at least here with Pepe and Jose, they're asking for that type of feedback. And I never thought about ever providing any of that feedback to a producer, ever. Or information, in fact.
Another thing is like the fragility of the supply chain part, right? Like if there's a bad storm, if there's like a lot of extended bad weather, it can totally ruin a harvest crop. And we as consumers like, oh, it's kind of weird out there, but on the ground, if one machine goes down, then it's like everything's out of whack. And what I'm thinking about is like how do end users contribute to that process, right? Like Wendelbo is so famous for like saving those farms, but that can't be it. There needs to be more of that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. How do you contribute?
Yeah, and the other thing too is like knowledge gaps and things as well, right? When we buy coffee, we look at, oh, this is what this roaster says about this coffee. Oh, it tastes great. This is what the processing's like, right? But like you do not understand the difficulty of how many hands are involved in doing some of these processes, right? And it's like you need 5 to 10 people to just even get the cherries, then to process, then to do all these different types of things. And it's like, you can't reduce that. It's so hard to reduce that down to a single paragraph. And most of the consumers, like, I think Say, for example, has done an amazing job where Lance writes like paragraphs on the producer and the type of processing and the work that happens. But most of the time, people don't care. They just read the flavor notes, right? The flavor notes are the last things listed. The producer's the first thing listed, but most people care just about those flavor notes, right? And maybe they'll look at the process and varietal, but it's like, dude, you ignore that. Like, it's just like so much of the work is just ignored. Or, even the roasters in the West and all of that are trying, right? They're trying to communicate the difficulty and the work, but it just completely gets lost, and literally probably in translation. But like it just like you don't understand. It doesn't click. Like for me, why I came here is that I wanted to see it with my own eyes, and now everything that everybody else has told me in industry has started to click. Like look at the amount of work that they do. Look at this. Look at this. Look at right. It's like. For me, I'm really starting, like when I read these cards or description of coffee, it's like that all, I appreciate it so much more given what I've seen these past few days.
It's not just about like several hundred hours of fermentation. There's all the stuff surrounding it of picking it, milling it, pulping it, all that stuff.
I also think one thing that has been quite interesting for me, maybe because this is how Pepe does his stuff, is how simple everything is.
Yeah.
Technological advancement, right? We hear this all the time on like, okay, we gave these mechanical depulpers to these producers in Ethiopia, and suddenly the coffee quality goes up exponentially. Like it is, I mean, coming from living in a first world country to origin and all of that, it's like It is way different here.
It's a savior complex, right? Like, add machinery, just add money, add automation, but that's not necessarily the solution everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great example of that, where it's like the more hands that touch the coffee, the better it actually is. And a lot of the processes are just incredibly simple and they're great. My conclusion so far is that there is a very big disconnect between understanding the quantity of work that happens and the amount of effort that goes into bringing you a single coffee bean, right? Like this is something that I think I've learned. I just like cannot believe the amount of work that goes into just getting a single cherry ready.
I think this is going to be like, what, 5 grams of roasted beans?
Yeah, and those are all like defects, right? And you know, Robert's here sorting it out, but it's like, I feel like we as consumers need to spend a little bit more effort to start to understand some of this stuff, right? And I don't know, that's my viewpoint currently, and maybe I just haven't been immersed enough with some of the content and things that exist out there for understanding what happens at Origin. But yeah, my main thing is that I just see people write messages online talking about, oh, you know, we should pay producers more money, we should do all these things. But it's like, I think yes, we need to do that, but also we need to understand what the hell is going on, right? And you know, like the amount of steps that it takes to just bring you one of these, right? It's like, I don't know, I'm just like, oh my God, there's so many things that I'm thinking about. I haven't fully formed like my full conclusions on everything, but I'm like, I've learned a lot in the past 72 hours of just being here.
This is like specialty, sure, but some form of this has to happen in every producing country. That's not, I don't know what it's like in Ethiopia, but I'm sure they have to do like hundreds and hundreds of times more of this. But how can we get insight into what they are doing, what their plights are, what their struggles are for getting better coffee?
Yeah, and the thing is like, I think this is best case example.
This is
what we're looking at.
Yeah.
And we're already saying like, oh my God, we as consumers do not know anything. There's so much stuff
Like
missing.
every employee here gets to drink what they're working on. They get to taste it, right? They get Finca Soledad coffee.
Right. That was just like some things that I felt like rambling and ranting about. Just because it's just such amazing work that these producers are putting in, especially here at Finca Soledad. But I just feel like as a consumer, of course, a coffee enthusiast and coffee professional, right? I feel like I've learned a lot. Just literally seeing these things with my own eyes. I mean, getting my hands dirty, sure, right? All of that. But it's like, I think there's a big disconnect right now between everything, and we need to do something to solve that. So, yeah.
I think we know a lot about coffee, but at the same time, coming here, it's almost shameful how little we know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's completely true. And, you know, I don't know what the answers are right now, but I really wanted to talk about that, right? It's like, where are the disconnects? What have I learned? And what are the observed disconnects right now between consumer, roaster, and producer? And I think there are a lot still, despite the amount of work that people in specialty have done. So that is all I want to talk about. Hopefully this was thought-provoking. If you have any questions, please discuss below. But yeah, I'm like, this is crazy, the amount of work that producers put in, and I wanted to just share kind of that perspective that I have after spending some time here. Thank you guys so much. See you guys later.